Hello, Facebook. Welcome to the 5-day outlining workshop. We are on day 3 now, which means we are halfway through this. I cannot believe it. Today, we're going to work on outlining Act 2A of your novel. So yesterday, we talked all about Act 1. We talked about the setup, we talked about your catalyst, and we went over why it is so important for your main character to choose to enter Act 2. If you missed yesterday's video, it is on this page at somewhere on this page. It'll live here forever, so don't worry. There's always a chance to catch up. And if you want to work through all of this information today at home or whenever you just have some spare time, make sure to click on the link in the comments and you can get your very own downloadable version of all of this information in the 5-day outlining workbook. Okay, so now that that is over, we are going to start talking about Act 2A. So this is what's called the fun and games portion of your book. I stole that term from Blake Snyder, who wrote a fantastic book called Save the Cat. If you haven't been a part of Save the Cat yet, I'm just going to do a quick plug for it because this book completely changed the way I thought about structure. It's actually about screenwriting, but it works in a pinch for novel writing as well. You just have to kind of hack some of the tips so that it's more for books instead of for screenwriting, but it's definitely worth taking a look at, and I highly recommend you picking up your own copy. So Blake calls Act 2A the fun and games section of the book. He also calls it the promise of the premise, and I think both of those ways of looking at this act are really relevant and important to think of. So most writers actually kind of mess up this part of the book. It's one of the hardest parts of the book to write because you've had all of the excitement in Act 1 of setting up your story, of getting to your catalyst, of showing everybody who your main character is, and then you hit Act 2 and it's like, where do I go from here? It's too early to start really building the main drama, but you can't just keep going with your setup and your catalyst because that's already happened and that would just feel really boring. You don't really want to live there. So you have a lot of writers who nail the first section of the book and then get to this part and end up with boring scenes that drag and that don't really do anything. So that's why I think fun and games is such a great way of thinking about it. Basically, this section of your book is where whatever your book is about, whatever you say when you're explaining your book to your mom or your relatives or your best friends, however you talk about your book, this is that part. This is when that stuff happens. So what I mean is, if you're writing a romance novel, all right, this is this section of the book where your two protagonists are having all sorts of really juicy, great romantic tension. If you're writing a mystery novel, this is the section of the book where your main character is following clues, trying to figure out what weird thing has happened, trying to get to the bottom of this, but everything just feels further and further away. If your book were a movie, this would be the scene. These would be the scenes that make up the trailer. So they should be big, fun scenes that really show your audience what your book is about. So in the Hunger Games, these are the scenes where Katniss is training for the games. She's meeting the other competitors. She's trying to figure out whether or not Peeta has ulterior motives. She's getting her makeover and dealing with publicity. These are big, rich, interesting scenes. In Harry Potter, these are the scenes where Harry is wandering through Hogwarts, figuring out about what the magical world is all about, meeting his friends, getting into conflict with Draco. These are the scenes where it's like he is learning to be a wizard, all right? So when somebody is telling their friend oh, there's this great book about a boy wizard in this magical world and it's set at this crazy school, these are the scenes that they're referring to. All right, I think that I've adequately driven that point home, so I'm gonna move forward. Usually it's several scenes or chapters, so every act in your book is about a quarter of the book. So your Act 1 is about 25% of the book. Act 2A is about 25% of the book. So if you're writing a 200-page novel, think of it as about 50 pages. Obviously, you can scale that. If you're writing a 1,000-page novel, it's going to be much larger, but keep in mind that it's about 25% of your book. So you're going to want to come up with a lot of different ideas for how these chapters are going to unfold. You're going to want to keep those grounded in action. I know that I sound like a broken record on this point. keep all of your scenes grounded in action, but it's so important to remember that scenes where a character is sitting around thinking by themselves are boring to read. Don't do that. Instead, think about a way in which you can show the reader what information you're trying to convey by having the character do something. So an easy hack for this is, if you remember we talked about like maybe coming up with a couple of different problems that your main character can face in Act 1 to show their want through action. So in Harry Potter, those problems are like, Harry is really poor and only gets to, wear his cousin's like hand-me-downs. He's kind of always hungry. He doesn't really have any friends. His family doesn't really like him that much. He's really looking for a place to belong. So in Act 2A, we see the inverse of all of those problems. We see that Harry has more than enough to eat at Hogwarts. He immediately finds new friends at Hogwarts. He's not sleeping under the stairs anymore. He has this great big 4-post bed. He's learning all about magic, which was a topic that he wasn't even allowed to bring up when he was at home. All of these problems that he initially had in Act 1, we're seeing the ways in which they're starting to be solved in Act 2A. So even though these things are starting to be solved, we want to make sure that they're not all the way solved, because you still have a ton more book left to write, but we're starting to see hints of it. Some of these problems are seeming like they're going to have some solutions. Another example, so in Breaking, Charlotte's sort of a wallflower. She's really shy. She's not that pretty. She can't get the guy. She's bad at fencing. Her mom doesn't respect her, etc., etc., etc. In Act 2A, I show that the weird choppy haircut she gave herself has started to grow out, and now it looks kind of cool. All of a sudden, the guy that she has been in love with forever is starting to pay attention to her. She's doing better in fencing randomly, even though she has not practiced. All of these problems that were being developed in Act 1, in Act 2A, we're starting to see solutions for them. And that's all after the catalyst, where she takes this strange potion that her best friend left behind. Okay, so you want to make sure that your character is propelling the action forward through their own choices. So in Harry Potter, when he's going and exploring the school and making friends and all of this stuff is happening, like, he's making choices to make things move forward. He makes the choice to hop on a broomstick and go after the Remember All, even though they told him not to. And then, yeah, he lucks out when that means that McGonagall puts him on the Quidditch team, but that is directly related to the choice that he made, this forward action that's happening then. Things are not happening to your character. Your character makes choices to propel the story forward. So a great way to think about this is it's rising action. I'm sure you guys have heard this term before, but I like to think about it like a roller coaster. You're on a roller coaster, and the roller coaster is slowly going up. All right. Everything is getting tense and exciting. We are priming your audience for the inevitable plummet in Act 2B. But right now, all we're feeling is that rising tension, that crazy feeling that things are getting worse, things are getting tense and more exciting, and things keep going. So the peak, the summit, is the middle of your book. This should be dead center in your book. The first half of your book is all rising tension, and then the peak is what is something we call the midpoint high. So this is something happens in this scene